hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our mRNA mini-series, a joint effort between Biotech Blueprint and the Biotech Capital Campus. My name is Katarina Rosnick, and I'm still in Europe visiting family. And joining me is Hartaj Singh from Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Hartaj.
Hey, Katarina.
So today we'll be talking about mRNA vaccines again, this time latent viruses and cancer or oncology. Last time we focused on mRNA technology itself and also on mRNA vaccines against respiratory viruses like flu, cold, RSV, and the combos. But we also touched on latent viruses and cancer as well. But today we want to expand on that a little bit.
That's great, Katarina. I'm really looking forward to this. I know we had a good time the last time talking about mRNA and mostly we focused on infectious diseases. But I also want to point out to our viewers and listeners that we both decided that we're gonna call from like the urban jungle. So Katarina is in her urban jungle, and I'm in my urban jungle. So you get some green, some foliage with your mRNA podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm outside of Prague, so right now I'm in like a nice, in the countryside, but very close to a big city for sure. Okay, so, but I'm coming back tomorrow, so I'll be back to the US.
It's always nice to come back.
Yeah, so totally. So we have two main topics we want to cover today, latency and oncology. We can maybe start with the latent viruses and why those matter. So Moderna is one of the few companies that, or probably one of the only companies that are focusing on making an mRNA vaccine against latent viruses. And so what is latency? I think most people have heard the term, and it basically means that these viruses are tricky, not like your usual viruses. And the reason is that they infect a person and then they hide and wait, right? And they evade the immune system, and they kind of hide away from the immune system. And so the body thinks, right, that the virus is gone, but it's still somewhere, usually in cells that live long, or like, for one, they live long, and then they also propagate, and they propagate the viral genome usually in it. They do nothing until sometimes they reactivate, and then that can cause issues in the person. And traditional vaccines, they struggle with latency for obvious reasons. We have the immune evasion, but mRNA, it's programmable, and it has the ability to encode several antigens and kind of get at the virus from different angles, which normal vaccines are not able to do. And then also it can kind of do two things. So it can activate humoral immunity, so antibodies, but also T cells, which are really crucial for getting rid of latent infections in the human body. But the main two viruses, or three really, that Moderna is creating vaccines against are CMV, EBV, and then herpes viruses and others as well. But these are really cool vaccines and that they're trying to do. We can maybe talk a little bit, if you want, about each of these viruses. But the prototype one is the cytomegalovirus one, or the CMV.
Yeah. No, Katarina, you're spot on. I think before we kind of like start talking about the three Latin viruses, maybe starting off with CMV, right? Maybe I just take a step back, right? So one of the reasons I really enjoy our conversations is, you have a PhD from a very elite institution called Johns Hopkins. I'm not gonna every institution is elite, but I think I really have a lot of respect for Johns Hopkins. And Duke's got a great school where I went, like lots of other schools, Harvard, UCSF, et cetera. But one of the reasons I really enjoy talking with you is because, of your very deep-seated knowledge, and also because you are actually very, I think, disciplined in applying, scientific logic. I tend to extrapolate a lot more easily, and maybe, that's probably good. I didn't get a PhD. I wouldn't have survived. But I want to just I want to take a step back and get your thing. So, we talked about humoral and and cellular responses, right? And why antibodies and T cells are important. So maybe if you can just kind of explain, right? These older vaccines, they tend to generally stimulate antibodies, right? And they don't tend to stimulate T cells or longer more deep-seated response, which you really need for these latent viruses because they're just hiding around in your body, right? So maybe if you can just talk about how, like, what is the function of antibodies and,
Yeah.
like, the T cells and that and why their short-term and long-term responses are so important, especially
Yeah.
in latent viruses.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, exactly what you're saying. Usually the vaccines that we have and that are functioning the best right now are sort of the usual vaccines that we vaccinate kids with and adults with today elicit antibody responses, and those are very, very important. And they're still important even for those vaccines that will elicit T cell responses. Like, you still need humoral immunity. And the thing is that, if you look at a list of diseases and you think, okay, we have a vaccine for this one, okay, it definitely, if you just guess that it elicits humoral immunity, you'll be right. And then if you have any target that's been troublesome to make a vaccine against, like malaria or HIV, we need that T cell immunity as well. Elicit. And it's just much more complicated to do so with vaccines to elicit strong T cell immunity. That's sort of prolonged enough, right, to achieve what we need to achieve. I think a vaccine that really would elicit a strong cellular immunity, and that would be, if we can do that, if science can do that, then HIV would benefit tremendously from that, because it's a virus that hides in T cells, right? So there's CD4 T cells that are helper cells, and then CD8 T cells, which are cytotoxic T cells, and they come in and they identify a cell that is, can be cancerous or causing disease or a virus, and they literally destroy it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, Katerina, that was really, I mean, at the end of the day, your point about, the antibodies and T cell cellular and humoral and cellular responses is really critical because it actually underpins some of the reasons why, aside from infectious diseases, like mRNA vaccines started actually being utilizing latent viruses. So a long time ago, before COVID, changed our lives, and still I think is affecting our lives in many ways,
Yeah.
consciously and subconsciously. But if you actually think about cytomegalovirus, Moderna actually gave a long presentation, about 3 hours to investors. I think it was like in 2018 or 2019 in New York, all around cytomegalovirus CMV. And they talked about how their data at that point was better than a Merck vaccine, which was based on an older, platform against cytomegalovirus also. And one of the big reasons they gave, and there were many reasons why the mRNA vaccine was, very successful, or has been successful. Still, we got to see the phase 3 readout and see if that's, if it's going to be successful and make it to market. But the early data was because they could actually encode a lot more like antigens in there. They included like the 6, glycoprotein B and pentamer complex. Merck was only doing like one of those. So mRNA has, the beauty about it is that you can actually, because you're using your body's own ribosomal complex, right, to essentially make whatever protein of choice or snippet of a protein of choice that you encode with the mRNA. Into that mRNA, you can put like any kind of antigen, right? And this has implications for when we'll talk about later with oncology also, and some of the things that Moderna and BioNTech are doing there. But this is just so elegant. It's so cool that the way that they're stimulating the antibody and the T cell other responses is not through some like magic bullet or anything. It's just that they encode in the mRNA the various antigens, right? They stick them into a fat bubble and then they give it to you. That fat bubble goes into your tissues. Your body takes the mRNA and then creates that, whatever that protein or the snippet of that protein of choice. The older vaccine platforms can't do that. You can only give like one part of like a protein or something, and we won't get into that. There's complicating factors, but that's the elegance of mRNA, that showed itself for COVID-19 when we needed those vaccines desperately, and it probably saved 10 to 20 million lives worldwide minimum. And now, there's this like burgeoning interest in Latin viruses also.
It's a great point. Exactly what you're saying. So I think that's maybe something I should have said, is that, the older vaccines, they they're limited by the amount of things that they can encode. And but then here, like you said, we have six, mRNA or six proteins that this mRNA encodes, and so it can block infection of this specific virus, the CMV virus, into all the type of cells that it usually infects, the fibroblast, epithelial cells. And so, it can, like I said, it can elicit both T cells and the humoral responses, which if it works, and it seems to be doing pretty well in the early trials, it would be really remarkable. And I think so my PhD also is I did my PhD in immunology, but I was within the School of Public Health. And so we always thought about, how do things also affect public health? And this one, I think, is a perfect example, the CMV vaccine, as to how that would affect public health on a really great level, because CMV, so it's a thing we don't really think about as much, I think, as a population, right? It's a virus that most of us are infected with when we're kids, 50% of the population about. But something I didn't think about, and I learned not long ago, really, is that, it's a big burden on pregnant women, because if a pregnant woman gets infected or reinfected, so you don't have really an immunity that's lifelong, you can still get reinfected in pregnancy, your child can get a basically congenital cytomegalovirus infection, which is a big burden on the public health, because it's the most common viral or leading infectious cause of birth defects in the United States and worldwide. There's about one case per 200 births, which is, quite common. And it can have lifelong sort of effects, disabilities, including hearing loss, which is, not there's ranges to that, but it can also have neurodevelopmental difficulties. Moderna is currently having this trial, which is basically focused on women who are seronegative, so they're negative for CMV and they're in childbearing age, and they want to see if they prevent these cases of this CMV in fetuses, basically. And I think that's really interesting one, because, it's a prophylactic vaccine, so it's trying to prevent this pretty serious infection, and there's a pretty big market as well for that. And, it is a very clinically meaningful endpoint, right? It's preventing, it's not just like some surrogate antibody titer, right? You have an actual prevention of a primary maternal infection that leads to, it sort of raises a bar, I think, for mRNA in general. It's like a big test, I think, for the mRNA as a platform in general for latent viruses, but also for oncology, I think. I think they showed in phase 1 that they were strong neutralizing titers, and they really were able to elicit both B and T cell responses that were strong. So I'm excited to see what this brings, for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think the cytomegalovirus, that's their first kind of like test case. It's not an easy trial because, as you said, Katerina, it's in pregnant mothers. I remember, and I'm very hazy on this, but I do believe the cost of like a baby that's born with this infection that might, that could have gotten it from their mother, and this is in the tens of thousands, I believe, that are born in the United States, is more than $1 million, for their entire lifetime, and that's probably underestimated because a lot of resources, because there's no real treatments there, so a lot of the resources are academic, and generally what we've seen in the biopharma industry is that academic studies tend to underestimate populations and spend and whatnot, that when actually companies come in there and they actually spend a lot more resources doing market research around whatever disease to which a drug that they're selling, they find out that the disease is much bigger, quote unquote bigger, and the costs in society are a lot greater because they can actually spend greater time. But but it's very important for us because the academic studies is where it all starts, right? It gives us a leading indicator of really where the deep-seated problems are, and then at least the American biopharma capitalist model is that then companies can go after that from the drug side, and devices and everything else being different. But cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr, herpes, beyond EBV, these are where Moderna has presented data. I don't think this is an area that BioNTech necessarily is tackling. They might be in the longer term. But cytomegalovirus, their phase 3, the interim readout, which is a higher bar, Katerina, it's just statistically speaking, there's a higher bar to it. I believe is slated to happen, before the end of the year or sometime early next year for CMV. And then the full readout probably happens like sometime later next year for phase 3. And the readouts are just based on the number of events that have happened in both arms, the experimental arm versus the control arm. So we'll see, their earlier data was pretty good, but again, clinical trials,
Right.
things can go wrong, and then Epstein-Barr and herpes, but it's really interesting, Karina. The other thing is that Moderna once, I think like 2, 3 years ago, did present in one of their vaccine days, a decent bit of insights, and they had some fairly well-known key opinion leaders talk about HIV. You talked about HIV, and they actually have a very kind of, I would call it like a, preclinical phase 1 program right now for HIV, a vaccine or HIV. But they also talked about why finding a vaccine against HIV is so difficult. And they, there's some, very unique things about the HIV virus that make it really, really complicated. And, they mentioned that was more like a decade-long kind of program, So, but right now, cytomegalovirus will be the first,
Yeah.
test case, at least in late-stage clinical trials, and Epstein-Barr and then herpes.
Yeah, but I think that, like you said, I think it raises the bar. It's a good sort of case study in a way, right? So if this works, and I hope it does, I think it would open door for maybe improved other latent viral vaccines as well as oncology vaccines, and then maybe some other targets that are much more difficult, like HIV. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this is we have a good readout from the phase 3, which you're right, I missed that point. It's currently phase 3 trial is fully enrolled, and it's ongoing now. So that's
Yeah,
pretty
no worry. I
far
mean, these
far
clinical
in.
trials, that's what I did for a living, right? So I'm a
Yeah.
little bit more, it's easier for me.
Yeah.
Just quick question on these, like, there's a lot of these programs, in latent viruses. Like, just as a person who's followed Moderna, and maybe with not the same sort of, level that I got to do covering Moderna, for my last firm, when I worked as a sell side analyst, like, where would you put the latent viruses like as interesting to you, versus like infectious disease, like their vaccines? Like, if the latent viruses platform starts working, like, would you, and I think you're a believer in mRNA, but would you get more excited about mRNA as a
Oh,
vaccine
absolutely.
platform?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would 100%. My excitement would raise significantly.
Yeah.
And I'm a little biased because I think that the infectious disease stuff is very interesting and exciting. It's what I partially did my PhD on, and I think that was a great achievement. But I mean, we don't have RNA vaccines for anything else right now, right? And so I think anything else would be really exciting, but especially these latent viruses. I mean, just the fact that if we have been unable to there's not a single vaccine for those right now that works. So I think that if they're successful, I would definitely be even more excited. But I'm hopeful. I'm pretty optimistic about this as always. But I'm hopeful that it works. Like I said, for many reasons.
Yeah. No, and that, maybe is like a good segue into like oncology, right? In cancer immunotherapy. And it's kind of interesting because here, and I don't know how important this is to you as a person, again, who's watched Moderna and mRNA develop as a platform, but it's kind of interesting, in the investing community, cancer immunotherapy has been historically called like, cancer vaccines. And companies like Moderna and even BioNTech are trying to change the verbiage. They're trying to, now they say their cancer vaccines are more like what they call neoantigen, individualized neoantigen therapy, INT, right? It's a mouthful. And whereas cancer vaccines sound so easy and elegant. Any thoughts on that as an outside observer? Like, well, you think that, I mean, would you prefer cancer vaccines? But I think you also know what INT means, like, because I think for the layperson, it's very confusing. What is INT, right? What's
Yeah,
neoantigen
no.
therapy?
I think cancer vaccine is good enough. Maybe you can say an individualized cancer vaccine, because then
Right.
it kind of gets at that, the way it's done, which they are personalized. So, but I would say cancer vaccine is better than the whole thing
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they're
No,
using.
it's
Yeah.
also because, by the way, cancer vaccines for biotech specialists, investment professionals, have had a horrible history. Like a lot of money, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars have been spent and not worked. So the biotech investing specialists, they're like, let's not associate ourselves with like, an investing philosophy that hasn't worked for like 30 years.
Yeah,
Whereas I
that's
think the
fair.
broader public is like, because I think if I saw like, Moderna's INT successful, people are individualized neoantigen therapy. Like
Yeah.
I think even a biology major in college might have a hard time understanding what that
You could
is. Right?
say, hey, maybe we could say next gen cancer vaccines,
There you go. I like that. Next
because
gen
next
cancer
gen is
vaccine.
the new, that's a new buzzword. So
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully somebody from Moderna is watching this and they might have to give you some royalty there,
I don't know,
Kathleen.
but
That would
I
be
hope they are.
nice. Yeah, that would be nice. So, if I'll just maybe before you kind of, if you can just kind of explain like how like these mRNAs work in like
Yeah,
oncology, because
definitely.
that's actually an area I'm very hazy on. I'll just give people a little bit of a background. For most investors, the mRNA platform for infectious diseases and Latent viruses was sort of like combined. So a lot of people gave credit to Moderna platform, for infectious diseases and sort of like rolled up Latent viruses like in
Mhm.
there. I think if cytomegalovirus is successful in phase 3, then people will have to take a step back and be like, oh, wow, maybe we need to give them like, Latent virus is a different part of the platform. We need to give them, the value to their platform for that also, right? Both through future sales and earnings projections and through the multiple like expanding, right? So let's wait and see. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But oncology was always viewed as like the next step, other than rare diseases for mRNA and for Moderna going from infectious diseases. Latent viruses just kind of considered like, part of like infectious disease viruses. And so oncology was kind of like and that's where a lot of the focus has been. So if you actually look at media and you look at what's been written about, almost nobody writes about Latin viruses except when they do R&D day, when they do a vaccine day, then somebody in the media will write about it. But most people still write about oncology as being like the next big thing, right? And it's kind of interesting to me as to how does mRNA, like cancer immunotherapy, sort of like work?
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think, I just think that, like I said, even before the CMV virus, like 50% of population have it. The EBV is, very ubiquitous. 90% of population, U.S. and worldwide population have it. But for some reason, people don't really know about that as much, and they don't know what these viruses can cause. Like, I mean, I wasn't really aware of CMV being dangerous for pregnant women. I wasn't really aware of EBV causing cancers, right? There's a lot of cancers associated with EBV, mononucleosis and MS. So that it's now being pointed to as a causal link or reactivation of EBV, even though 90% of the population has it. Reactivation in some people can cause MS. And so I think that these latent viruses deserve more focus and more research and more interest, I think. But cancer is cancer. People feel very strongly about it. Everybody knows someone who has had cancer or died of cancer. And so I think that that's why people are just excited, I think, for something that will finally work for cancer. And solving cancer is like the biggest thing that people hope we can achieve in the near future. And so I think that's why that's sort of the focus. But why I think the latent viruses also, just before I segue, are important is also because, like I said, the EBV virus is now associated with many cancers. And so I think having a success because I think those readouts are going to come sooner, right? The latent viruses and their trials are going to come out sooner than oncology vaccines. And so I think that success there is also going to sort of determine the outlook on, and just like the excitement or the lack of, about the cancer vaccines, about the next gen cancer vaccines that both BioNTech and Moderna are working on. But yeah, so I think that both companies, Moderna and BioNTech, have really exciting vaccines in their pipelines. One of the more exciting ones from Moderna is the one that encodes 30 plus, patient-specific tumor neoantigens, as you said. And so basically what they do is they sequence the specific tumor of the person, and that's fairly involved, but they have been able to do it in a very short amount of time, about a few weeks. And from that, they basically load the mRNA vaccine with the specific tumors from the person. So they're, personalized to the tumor to each individual person. And then they're delivered with Merck's Keytruda, this vaccine. And so it basically helps to unleash the T cell response. And that's really what you want, because T cells are incredibly powerful. So basically this 34 or 35 neoantigen vaccine with Keytruda is really focused on unleashing the T cell response in the person. So it's pretty amazing because you are not only creating a vaccine that's specific to them, but also their own immune system does all the work, right? Ideally. And so right now, initially it started for melanoma, and they're expanding to solid tumors, to non-small cell lung cancer, I think some other skin cancers, bladder cancer. And then I was looking at BioNTech, and they have a lot of vaccines as well. They're doing, again, advanced melanoma, head and neck cancer, kind of similar stuff, colorectal cancer, some more lung cancers. And so, and all these vaccines are kind of in phase 1, phase 2. I think they're going to take much longer than maybe the average person would think, because there's kind of been, I think it's on and off, this excitement about these vaccines. But I think that we're looking at like 2030 when we actually will probably know more, and if these vaccines and these trials are successful, basically.
Yeah. It's really interesting, Katerina, with how, as you explained, how like mRNA vaccines work in oncology, right? And they're essentially, in many ways, it's not like a typical vaccine in the sense that they're being used to turbocharge probably like current therapies or like, actual therapies that are being given for cancer. The vaccine ends up like turbocharging it. And so like, how does that work? Like in the simplest way, I mean, in oncology, like in melanoma, it's really elegant, their approach. What they're doing is they sort of like, you get these tumors in your skin, and the tumors, when they get bad, they can really metastasize very, very quickly. But before they metastasize, what you can do is you can like surgically excise them, right? So you give the patient like pembrolizumab, the checkpoint inhibitor, Merck's checkpoint inhibitor. Before that, it helps with like making sure there are no tumors around the body or elsewhere. The main primary tumor maybe makes it smaller. Then you excises out, and then you give like sort of like adjuvant therapy with like this vaccine, which is that you give pembrolizumab plus the vaccine. So originally you gave pembrolizumab, then usually you might have a surgery or you have the surgery, and then after that you give pembrolizumab plus the vaccine. And the whole theory is that it essentially keeps the tumor from returning or your cancer from returning, and that's why it's a sort of a vaccine, even though technically it's not being given by itself. Right. And it's really elegant, right? So if you're a person who's had melanoma, and people who have melanoma, a lot of them are genetically predisposed, right? They have fairer skin, they're more from northern hemispheres. So there's always this like fear, right, at that point, that if you've had the cancer, you might have it again, and you have to be on this like therapy from Merck. And then now we're going to see, hopefully, a trial, if it works. I think next year, the year after that, they could read out in melanoma, is you give the vaccine on top of the cancer therapy by Merck called pembrolizumab, this antibody, and you don't get that. And then maybe in the longer run, you can do away with the actual therapy and just take the vaccine in itself. And so how is the vaccine working in this like post-surgery setting? And all it's doing is, as you explained, these neoantigens, the tumor that you've taken from the patient, Moderna identifies the unique parts of that tumor that are like, unique to that patient, and essentially encodes that as little snippets within that mRNA vaccine. And so your body's immune system stays like alert because it keeps on getting that vaccine, from time to time. Right now, it only gets it, a few times in that trial. And then you basically are alerting it. It's like a sentry that sees like a certain kind of a thief skulking around. That sentry is going to be a lot more alert to that thief, right, skulking around, and making sure that they keep an eye out for them. And that's essentially what the vaccine is doing. It's just heightening your immune system's ability to monitor, what's called immune surveillance post, you getting the cancer and having it removed, and hopefully being then cancer-free for as long as possible. maybe even your entire lifetime, right? But I just want to add one other thing. It's the way that Moderna chooses these neoantigens that's actually really cool. And we can maybe just touch on this a little bit. They have machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms. We talked about this last time on the first podcast, where they're utilizing that. So what they do is they take like a person's regular tissue, they take the tumor biology, and then they run that through, and then they use their machine learning algorithms to identify, what are the neoantigens, not antigens, neoantigens that are specific to that patient. So what are the epitopes? And they identify possibly hundreds, maybe even thousands in that tumor. Then they use the machine learning and artificial algorithms to go a step further and try to identify the neoantigen epitopes that are causing, that seem to be the most like distributed in that tumor, like that are at the highest frequency, right? And those are then the ones that encode. So it's not a magic bullet. There's still some, hopefully the vaccine is, putting in the right neoantigens, but at least their data through phase 2 and early phase 3 seems to indicate that their approach on top of like Merck's therapy, which by the way is a high bar, because you're not just, imagine if you're getting a headache and you've already taken an aspirin, but the headache's still there, right? Then you take another therapy, right? But the aspirin is already helping on a certain level. Then you got to take another therapy on top of that. So that's how bad the headache is, but that tells you how good the other therapy has to be in order to work on top of aspirin, right? So these vaccines aren't being, by Moderna, especially melanoma, are not being asked to tackle a trivial problem. They're being asked to tackle, the cancer, the patient's already had cancer, it's been removed, melanoma, they're still getting the Merck immunotherapy called pembrolizumab, which is very, very good, one of the best anti-cancer therapies ever, an antibody. And on top of that, you're giving the vaccine. So Moderna, as I know that management team really well, they like to go after challenging problems. They've not, this is a very challenging problem. And, I think if it works, and I think, it seems like they've set it up well to work. I think the oncology community will be very appreciative.
No, I thank you so much for summarizing it this way. It's really incredible. I think what they're doing, because, like you said, and like we said before, the mRNA technology just enables so many to just get at the pathogen or the cancer in this case from so many angles, right? 34 angles, which is pretty amazing. And exactly, so basically an epitope or an antigen, right? It's just like a tiny piece on the tumor that basically they're targeting. And like you said, they use the cutting edge AI and machine learning to find those epitopes that are going to be the best or the most damaging to the cancer, right? And I think it's really incredible. And exactly like you said, then they inject it into the person, and basically the cells take up mRNA, and they again use it. They act like this is their own mRNA. They make the antigens in a large amounts. They basically express them on their own cell. So this is what happens, normally, and then they show it to the T cells. So this is like the crucial step to really making sure that the T cell response is very strong. And this can kind of, like you said, continuously happen. And so you really train your immune system so well against the specific tumor that this person has. I mean, it's genius, I think, and really exciting.
No, it honestly is, Katerina. It's like, and people, again, I think that when you're looking from the outside in, you look at cancer vaccines, and maybe if you have some idea about biotech, you realize how unsuccessful they've been for a long period of time, and have a lot of money has been spent in that area. And the elegance of Moderna's approach, and we talked in the last podcast, and I talked about when I went to their factories and I saw all this like software and hardware, all of the work they've done. They're probably one of the most like, technologically, and I mean like hardware and software savvy companies in biotech, literally. And that's because it didn't happen overnight. They actually invested the money in it, pre-IPO and after the IPO. That's where a lot of this money has gone into developing these like algorithms that help them with their machine learning tools and their artificial intelligence, all their like robots in their factories to automate their processes, right? A lot of automation, goes on as a biotech company. Now, I'm not talking like regular, comparable to a car company or something like that, right? But as a biotech company, they're extremely automated. And then, the success of the oncology platform with vaccines is actually going to be, to me, a really good insight about their capabilities with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I'll give you like a little tidbit. At my previous firm, when I used to go what's called marketing to clients, I had a really interesting lunch in London a beautiful restaurant with this gentleman who manages a fund in London. I'm forgetting the name of the fund. Really thoughtful gentleman. He was like, Hartaj, I don't know anything about biotech, but our fund likes to invest in companies that are focused on like, machine learning and artificial intelligence, like, software tools that can really help society move forward, and even like if it's on the cost saving side, et cetera. And he's like, talk to me about Moderna. And we spend almost an hour, like my salesperson had to like pull me out. He's like, we gotta go to the next meeting here. Like, because we were having such a great conversation because this gentleman really understood software and like hardware and all of the things that go. And he was like fascinated with all of the investment and the efforts that Moderna had put into, their portfolio. I think he invested in Moderna. Unfortunately, this is like 2 years ago. I don't think Moderna stock has done well. So hopefully he's still a believer. But I do think that, because of the short-term focus on Moderna on COVID-19 vaccines, people are throwing out, pardon the pun, the baby with the bathwater, right? In this case, people need to really understand what all is under the hood. And once these things start working and start becoming closer to commercialization and are commercial, Latent viruses, cancer vaccines, Moderna's, it's just going to be off to the races because of all the investments that they're doing, to make these successful, these projects.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I don't blame people. And also, like you said, for investors, it's more of a short-term, decision. And I feel like every week it comes up as the most shorted company on the exchange. So I think that, I understand that they're not doing so well this year. There have been a lot of issues that they faced from the government also, and like you said, the COVID vaccines, right? They're just not only the interest waned, but also now it's kind of up to you, a personal decision if you want to get vaccinated. And so again, I think that kind of is going to hurt them in the short term, but in the long term and in the long run, I think, like you said, a lot of people. And you can foresee the future as well, right? We don't know if these trials are going to pan out, but I think that at least some of them will. If I had to place a bet on that, I would definitely be pretty confident that, even if there might be some hurdles on the way, I think that this platform is incredibly powerful, and just excited to see what they do in the long
Yeah,
term.
no, Katerina, you're spot on. I mean, I've been in the investing world for a long time, but and we talk about this, you and I, offline, not on a podcast. But your instincts are really good from an investing perspective, because I actually, there's a reason why it's the most heavily shorted biotech stock or healthcare stock. I think a lot of these hedge funds have a lot of money to spend, and they generally tend to be pretty right, when they take a big position against something. So I think that should tell investors, something that are not biotech specialists. And if you do get into Moderna, it should be for a very long period of time, 3 to 5 years. You should be willing to take like volatility along the way. It's not, and then to your point also that some of these trials might not work, and that could add like even more volatility to Moderna. I mean, I always tell people that, people keep on saying, oh, biotech looks cheap, or this company's like, trading below cash, it's cheap. I'm like, you know what? There's one thing about biotech you should always understand. It can always go lower. Just like when it goes higher, just like when Moderna went from like during the pandemic from like 15 to 60 to 150 to 220, people are keeping on calling me like, hey, when do you think it's going to stop? I was like, if I knew that, I'd be doing something else. I'd be get a lot more money. And it peaked at like 450, and now it's back to like 25, so, kind of like it's back to where it slightly was above before the pandemic, but it's followed the same trajectory. A lot of biotech companies, who were successful, with the pandemic, Gilead and Regeneron had to deal with this problem, right? Their stocks benefited from the pandemic because they had treatments for the pandemic. But once the pandemic went away, like those like their sales went down. And so the overall sales went down because this one project sales were, right? And so the stocks came back. But luckily, almost all these stocks are still above their pre-pandemic level. I know that doesn't make a lot of investors happy that have waited those 5 years, but for us biotech folks, that's usually a good sign. That means, there are a lot of long-term holders who are willing to bide their time.
And also, like you said in the beginning, you always say that there's that, biotech is in a little bit of a dip right now, and I think that it is going to get better over time. And so we'll see.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think Moderna in some ways is like a small microcosm of biotech in general. Katerina, it's like, I do think that people should not, underestimate the volatility of biotech. It's had a great little run, over the last few months. But at the same time, we are coming to a part of the year where biotech tends to get a little sketchy. There's some tax loss selling, and people sell their winners and get ready for next year. Also, there's possibility of companies raising money by the end of the year or early next year. So usually, October, November tends to be a little bit, a little bit more difficult for biotech, and people should not underestimate that, right? So I always tell people that if you've made a little bit of money, it's always good to take some profits, take some money off the table, put it in the bank. You can't lose what you never had. But if you have it, in the bank, you took profits, then it's very difficult to lose it because you've actually banked it, right? So with biotech, that's especially important because of the volatility of our sector. But anyways, I mean, that's a different topic. The conversation for another day.
Yeah, that's a great insight, though. So I guess, we're kind of running out of time, but what do you think is, do you think, for example, that is going to be too expensive once these oncology drugs come out? Do you think it's going to be hard to access for a general person? Or what do you foresee kind of happening in the next few years if it's successful?
Yeah, no, so I read two very interesting little factoids recently that people have to keep in mind, right? It's really important. The prices of drugs, they're called drug prices, right? And so companies, whether they're biotech or pharma, are called drug companies. So people conflate the two. They think that because drug prices are high, it means the drug companies are the ones to blame. Most recently, and this is like companies like McKinsey, companies like Gilead, other companies, I believe like Biogen, other companies, pharma companies have even said this, that, 50 cents out of every dollar, for that a consumer pays for a drug, that 50 cents only goes to the drug company. The other 50 cents goes to the middle person. And they are actually the people where really a lot of the increase in drug prices in the United States are coming from. And then profitability, meaning like revenues minus costs equals sales, equals profits, right? The statistics are like, one third or 40% of the profits flow to these drug companies. The rest goes to that, all the middle people, right? So that's really where I think the current administration, by their direct to consumer, is trying to tackle that that issue head on. But aside from that, I think we have to keep that in mind, that drug companies are not the main reasons why drug prices are high. And then second to that, to your point specifically, Katerina, that, how are these therapies going to be priced? We actually know how these therapies are going to be priced. Most therapies, the way they are reimbursed is by the time they are successful in phase 3 and then submitted to the FDA, the drug companies do what's called pharmacoeconomic modeling. And any consumer can go to any drug company's website, and they have an entire set of like abstracts and posters and presentations that they give at conferences based on the pharmacoeconomic modeling behind their drug prices. And so, for example, in oncology, let's just take the example of melanoma. If in melanoma, once you have, you excise the tumor, and then you're getting like Keytruda, the drug, and then you want to keep that patient like cancer free, right? So the cost at that point is only Keytruda per year, which is probably like $200,000 per year, right? Then you add the cancer vaccine on top of that, which will be another, let's say, $200,000 per year. So all of a sudden you're talking about $400,000. Now that sounds like a lot, but here's the kicker. The kicker is we have the data. The pharmacoeconomic data and modeling shows us that if a patient relapses, right, who gets the tumor again, they start costing the healthcare system $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million per year. Right? Because at that time, the tumor is much more aggressive. It's probably spread more. They need a lot more therapy. They're put into a hospital. They're getting like many nurses looking at them, many doctors looking at them. It's spread to different organs. So you don't only have the medical oncologists. You've got different specialists coming and treating that patient, et cetera, et cetera. So the way that I mean, like the vast majority of biopharma companies set their prices is they do this pharmacoeconomic modeling. And what they try to figure out is, if the patient had the disease, how much does that cost society over time? And so we're going to price our drug at a fraction of that. Is that 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%? The company decides and they negotiate that with the reimbursement authority, which is a lot of times Medicare, before they go to the commercial folks, right? So it's done in a very rational manner, right? And the reason why the drug prices keep going up is because the middle people are the ones, I don't want to blame them all, but they are a big part of why they keep on taking these drug prices up. But the way that these therapies, mRNA vaccine therapies, will be priced will be by using these pharmacoeconomic modeling, which is very rational and is available freely to any person who wants to read up on it and understand why does this drug cost that much. Because if you're a person that, had melanoma and you had it excised and then you're taking the Merck drug and you want to reduce by another 30, 40, 50% your chances of ever getting the cancer again, why would you not take that? And why would your reimbursement person, company not sign off on it, knowing full well that if that patient relapsed, got that cancer again, it'd be a lot more aggressive and cost, society literally millions of dollars at that point. Right?
No, yeah, thanks. This is perfect, and I know exactly like what you're talking about. I think a lot of people fail to look into what goes into this pricing, and I took a whole course on drug development, and they exactly were explaining this, and the and also like there's so much cost obviously that goes into these tremendously expensive clinical trials and preclinical work and all that, right? So that also has to be priced in, and all the failed attempts and all that. So yeah, so that thanks for explaining though how they price these drugs. But I also had it's not really that if a drug is more used or more widely used, right? The price doesn't go like down. It's not like a TV, right? It kind of it's not that that's not the case, right?
Absolutely, that's not usually the case. But remember that as the drug is given to more and more patients, right? Now, it will come down in price. So the pharma and the biotech model are different, and the conversation for another day. Pharma, in general, the thumb rule is treats millions of patients, migraines, headaches, et cetera. And they are usually present in 100, 120, 150 countries. Biotech treats diseases that are in the tens of thousands, or rare diseases, hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. At most, it could be HIV, like Gilead, which is 1 million patients that they've treated, I think in total, million plus or something like that, right? So like the biotech business model is much more, your price times volume equals revenue. So the volume aspect, the patient are far fewer for biotech, which is why their prices have to be higher, right? So you're treating less patients, but these diseases, like melanoma, late stage melanoma is more like rare. That's tens of thousands of patients in the United States kind of get that, right? So to your point, at that point, what ends up happening is that yes, the drug prices don't go down and they might even increase what's called medical inflation, 2, 3, 4% net per year, right? But here's the benefit. Remember how I told you that if the patient relapses, right, they go from not costing, the system like the $200,000 for the vaccine on top. And if they've reduced the risk of recurrence by 30 or 40%, then that $2-3 million cost per year, doesn't happen or gets shoved off into the future. Now imagine if you scale that via 100, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 patients. So in oncology, the more patients that get these drugs, the less of them have a relapse, right? The less of them end up in a hospital. The overall benefits to society really start scaling in like an elliptical fashion. Like, does that make sense? Because it's not just one patient you're keeping out of the hospital anymore. And that's not the reason why these drugs are such a great ROI. You don't need to reduce the cost. It's the way you're actually helping the entire system, not just the healthcare system, is by reducing the burden on hundreds, if not thousands of patients that are not going to relapse. And nobody talks about that, but that's a massive cost that is getting taken out of the system of future costs. It's kind of like the environment, It's like, why do people abuse the environment? It's because there's actually not a cost associated to it. So we'll just toss our trash or do anything. But if there was a cost associated with using the environment, people would be a lot more careful, right? Like, if there's a park that everybody pays for, it usually stays very clean. It's the same thing in healthcare, right? Is that these drugs, we talk about the prices, but we don't focus about all of the benefits that accrue to society from many patients taking these and staying healthier, staying in their jobs, not being on unemployment. Like, these are the benefits.
Surviving, yeah, and
surviving,
working.
Right? Like not getting unemployment benefit because because they have to stay at home, actually being able to show up for work and, staying with their jobs and like being a, consumer that's contributing to society. So, that's part of like the healthcare, discussion that really gets focused upon, but these benefits are actually pretty, I hate to use the term astronomical, but they are in the way they aggregate.
Yeah, and just benefits the whole country really and the economy. But that's really great. Thank you so much for explaining that, and that makes total sense. And I was going to say, I think that just like with any drug, really, like some of these drugs that are very expensive, the insurance usually tends to cover them, obviously, because of this other cost that these patients then could cost the company. Especially in the US, I know that there's a lot of drugs that are very, very, very expensive and that are covered in the US and not covered in like other parts of the world, including Europe. So we'll see about that. But yeah, so thanks everyone, for tuning in again. Anyone who stuck this long with us, we really appreciate your support, and any subscribers to Biotech Blueprint and Biotech Capital Compass, thank you so much for your support. And we will have to think about the next series, or if we want to keep talking about mRNA or anything else. And if anyone has any suggestions, please let us know, because we're always open to some topic suggestions.
Had like a really, really good conversation, and I just look forward to the next one. I'm already pretty excited. I don't know what will be the next one, but I'm already pretty excited.
I don't know. We'll think about it.
We'll think about
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, safe travels.
Yeah,
to
you too.
And a lot of regards to your family.
Yeah. Likewise. Okay. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone.